is as follows. The creation of the Northwest Territory out of the Western lands was one of the few successful exercises of power during the years in which the Articles of Confederation were in place. Do you agree or disagree with this assertion? Why? What evidence can you offer to support your position? Why do you consider, or what do you consider to be the most important principles set forth in the Northwest Ordinance? Why? What do you consider to be the signal failures of the Articles of Confederation? Why?
We would agree that the creation of the Northwest Territory was one of the few successful exercises of power under the Articles of Confederation because it established federal dominion over previously state-held territory, created a governing system, established a process for the admission of new states, and the failure of the Articles. Prior to the creation of the Northwest Territory, states had various land claims, many of which were in conflict with those of other states. The Ordinance recognized these as under national authority, a strong assertion of power. Power was also asserted through the formation of a strong and functional government for the territory with 3 branches.
The Northwest Ordinance created a process of admission, which, according to Professor Akil Reed-Amar, allowed these territories to eventually win statehood on an equal footing with the original states. The Northwest Ordinance outlawed slavery in the territory, a very powerful stance given the political situation. The Ordinance's capacity to achieve was particularly powerful given the failures of the Articles, including an inability to regulate trade, levy taxes, raise an army, adhere to treaties, and remove British presence from frontier forts. As noted by Professor Lance Banning, under the Articles of Confederation, America was fragmented into 13 squabbling states that would not subordinate their common interests to the common good.
The most important principles in the Northwest Ordinance include freedom, equality, liberty, individual rights, popular sovereignty, representative government, the supremacy of the national government, consent of the governed, and limited government. Freedom assures basic human rights and helps to secure a limited government under the consent of the people. Equality prohibits slavery and involuntary servitude in the territories and assured, as noted by Professor Richard Bernstein, that territories would join the Union on an equal footing with the original 13 states. The protection of individual rights, like religious liberty, as well as due process protections, like habeas corpus, are important as they help to assure other principles, like justice, equality, freedom, and popular sovereignty. Popular sovereignty is important because it assures the people as the focus of the government and places them in charge. This is also reflected in the consent of the governed, which Federalist 40 described as the pure, original foundation of all legitimate authority.
The most important failures of the Articles government include the lack of an executive, judiciary, and military, the inability to enforce tax legislation, remove British troops from U.S. lands, adhere to the Treaty of Paris, stop excess debtor protection, trade efficiently among the states, compel individuals or states to adhere to the national government, and the difficult amendment and legislative processes. The national government had no governing power over the state. As noted by Professor Merrill Jensen, the Articles placed few restraints upon the states. Congress cannot tax the states in order to fund national programs or procure troops. Shays' Rebellion and the other states' refusal to provide troops led George Washington to assume, if government is unable to enforce its laws, anarchy and confusion must prevail.
The Articles made interstate commerce difficult, with many states printing their own currency and enforcing their own trade laws. Professor John Hollis noted that the printing of paper money by many states made it possible for poor debtor farmers to pay back loans with money worth less than that which they had borrowed from creditors. States also erased debts, endangering the reliability of contracts and the economy overall. The Articles Congress lacked the capacity to enforce foreign agreements. Robert Livingston notes that Congress may enter into treaties, but is without power to enforce them. The Treaty of Paris mandated the return of loyalist lands, but the government's inability to actuate this led to the continuation of British occupation of frontier forts.
Thank you very much. If you would be good enough to put your notes away, at this point we would like to ask you some follow-up questions.
Right. As I think you indicated, the Northwest Ordinance stated that slavery would forever be prohibited in the Northwest Territory, in the new states, and yet it allowed slaves who escaped to the Northwest Territory to be recaptured and returned to their owners. How might that contradiction be explained?
Well, I think what you see in the dichotomy between slavery being outlawed and fugitive slaves being returned is the idea of compromise embodied between both the regions. Under the Articles of Confederation, each state had its own individual sovereign rights. So the regions were broadly portrayed in power. So the North and the South both had the ability. And in the Northwest Territory, you did not have any reason to have slaves because it was not a region in which cash crops that needed high-intense labor from slaves was needed. So what you see through that is that the North gave up something and the South gained something by having fugitive slaves returned.
Any other?
I think what Jensen was adding there at the end is that the South really gave up their interests really by allowing the Northwest Territory to not have slaves, and by the Fugitive Slave Act, and by allowing the slaves to return, they were gaining something there.
Thank you.
You folks have noted that one of the main provisions of the Northwest Ordinance was that new territories, including the Northwest, would be eventually incorporated into the Union as states equal to the existing states. Two-part question: why do you think they did this? And what were the alternatives, and what might have happened if they hadn't done that? How would the United States have developed?
Right. So I think that it's really important that we put these territories and incorporated them as equal states. And this is important because a lot of the rights and the different structures of government that we incorporated into these territories were something that were really needed in our country back then, where there was a weak central government but strong states. So showing that a central government and a strong assertion of power through the Northwest Territory and making them able to create these territories into states, I think that was really important for us to be able to show that a strong national government were able to do such things.
Going off of what Dan said, it was one of the great successes of early American history, having the Northwest Ordinance, and basically the entire issue of prohibiting slavery in the territory shows how important it was to have compromise, and it was arguably our largest compromise and most important one at the time.
And what possibly could have happened if, should the Northwest Ordinance not have been written as it was, we could see a similar situation of how Britain was ruling over us during the before the Revolutionary War. We could have essentially a bigger government ruling over smaller territories that had less power, and similarly there could have been another revolution in those territories against the 13 colonies.
And to go into more detail as to why the Northwest Territory brought states in, Northwest Ordinance brought states in on an equal footing, I believe this was because you saw that the people who were moving to the frontier lands were people who had strong beliefs in individual rights and natural rights, and I don't think you would have seen them be happy if they were brought in colonial kind of fashion with the original 13 states. What you saw was, as Federalist 15 stated, that the great and radical vice of the current construction of the current Confederation is legislation for states as contradistinguished from the individuals of which they consist. I think that, in a way, the establishment of states on an equal footing was more of, it was a movement toward popular consent, though obviously still recognizing the states as a polity rather than equal.
Okay, thank you. The question I would like to ask you, could you tell me a little bit of your thoughts on the impact and the reaction to the Northwest Ordinance on Native Americans?
Well, what you did see with the establishment of the Northwest Ordinance was that many of these Native American tribes were displaced due to the Northwest Ordinance because of the movement of settlers. But this was not necessarily a government action because it was said directly in the Northwest Ordinance that the Native Americans would be treated fairly and with equal rights befitting a human being. But what you saw was that the settlers did not really follow this, and they saw the Native Americans as savages and kind of just pushed them further to the west.
But despite what the settlers did at the time, I think the Northwest Ordinance really was the first time you saw equality for Native Americans in the United States overall. It was the first time that equality was stated, that the Native Americans are equal to whites and they do have the same rights and protections as us.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know if we have time. I was just wondering, quick question, how did the Northwest Ordinance further the idea of public education? And I guess you don't so
You can text us. Okay, thank you very much. At this point, we'd like to give you some feedback, some reactions to your formal presentation and the follow-up question. What would you like to do?
Yeah. First of all, thank you. You're obviously well prepared, not only in the formal presentation, but I think responsiveness to some of the questions that we brought up. I was particularly pleased that you know, in addition to having obviously studied the book and the topic, in your presentations you cited a number of scholars and other resources which indicate to me that you went far beyond the materials that were provided to find out other historical perspectives and and cite relevant positions and viewpoints of noted historians. That was all quite good.
Yeah, no, I thought the presentation was good. Responsiveness to the questions was really good, and I'm very happy that you cited Merrill Jensen, who was one of my professors decades and decades ago at the University of Wisconsin. So it's nice that his work is still alive. He's not, but
Thank you. And I would agree with my colleagues. I thought you were evidently very well prepared, you were poised, you were very confident in your opening statements and in your delivery of the follow-up responses, very knowledgeable. I liked that there was a range of folks who responded. I liked particularly your recognition that the wording didn't live up to the reality with respect to Native Americans, and your point, Tom, being that words matter, that the fact that they were there are important and things on which to build. So I, again, compliment you and your teachers for a really well done job. Thank you.